Hi, this is Alex from handmaderiot, and this video is about knitting thimbles. And here's one. This is actually the only one that I use, meaning there are plastic, what are called yarn guides, and then there are these as well. They're often referred to as knitting thimbles, or in this particular case, the Norwegian knitting thimble. Although it is called the Norwegian knitting thimble, sometimes I'm not sure why that is. I was not actually able to find any references that talk about this thimble being used in the Norwegian knitting tradition. And in fact, I looked both online as well as some reference books. So first, in this knitting in the Nordic tradition, it does not mention anything about knitting thimbles. It talks about stranded color work in the Norwegian tradition, but nothing about yarn guides or knitting thimbles in general. And so I thought maybe the reference really comes from elsewhere. So I also consulted my Ethnic Socks and Stockings book. This is really about color work, socks and stockings and slippers from the Balkan region as well as the Middle East. Again, there is no mention of the knitting thimble here either. And last but not least, for reference, I used the lovely Mittens of Latvia book. It also does not talk about yarn guides or knitting thimbles either. So the only blog post that I was able to find was one from Kate Davies and one from knitty.com, and neither one of them discusses the history of the knitting thimble. It simply talks about how it is used and what it can be helpful for. Certainly if you're a continental knitter, a knitting thimble might be something that you want to check out. So what I'm going to do in this video is not necessarily go into the history of it, because again, I was not able to find information despite being pretty interested in it, but instead I'll show you how I use the knitting thimble, what it's good for, etc. Okay, so this particular one is from it's called the Loran, L-O-R-A-N, and I will link it down below. And in this particular case, it is referred to as the Norwegian knitting thimble. I actually bought this on a whim a number of years ago, and then just ended up using it whenever I got really into stranded color work. Now, also, Knit Picks sells one just like this. It's a little bit cheaper than the Loran one. And by the way, the Loran one is made by Dritz, the sewing notions company here in the US. And there are plastic ones as well, which the plastic ones kind of have like a flap. So it's like a ring with a flap that you open, and then it has numerous guides, little plastic dividers, which allow you to put the strands across the dividers and then close it back up. So you can actually have more than 2 strands at a time. Now, actually, I've knitted 3-stranded color work, believe it or not, using this thimble, but I've used 2 of them. I like this thimble so much that I own several of them, and typically when people see me knitting with them at knit nights and things like that, they get really interested in the knitting thimble, and so I've given quite a few of them away. So my favorite one is from the Loran. What makes it feel different is the fact that these little swirls, I guess is the best way that I can describe them, that hold the yarn and that separate the yarn strands are close to the thimble, and they're pretty squashed together so the yarn does not escape. Now, if yours is more wide apart, like the Addy knitting thimble is, then I suppose you could just squish it closer together, and then you could also roll it in. But either way, this one comes exactly as I like it, and I don't know if that's just because it really is the most comfortable one, or it's the first one that I've used, so I'm just really used to it. But a friend of mine is actually borrowing the one that I have from Knit Picks, which is the one that I buy most often. So if I order something from Knit Picks, I'll usually pick up like 2 or 3 of these extra in my cart, just to be able to give them away, excuse me for dropping that, or to just have them as a backup for myself if something should happen to this one. But I think that I will keep repurchasing this one. I did lose one of these already, and I repurchased it even though it's more expensive than the Knit Picks version. Now, I'll show you in a little bit how I wear this, but there are different schools of thought on how to wear it. Anyway, Addy also makes one. I'm sure other companies make a metal one. I don't have a plastic one to compare. I've never used it because I love this one so much. Oh, and this is the other thing I was going to say. So I've worn 2 of these. So one, and then the second one, and I'll insert a picture of that here. And that was for working with 3 strands, and it worked out really well, actually. So I've never used the plastic ones, even though they can hold more than 2 strands. Alright, so I'll just show you a little bit of what I've used to knit with stranded colorwork. Now, before I used the knitting thimble, I found yarn management to be pretty difficult because of the way that I knit. And I tend to wind the yarn across my index finger and keep my index finger suspended as I knit with my remaining fingers. And in stranded colorwork, when I had to put 2 yarns or more across my index finger and then tension them with my remaining fingers, it just didn't work as well. My hand was cramping up because I wasn't used to using that position, and I could have taught myself that, but you know, I care a lot about knitting fatigue because I really want to be able to knit every single day if at all possible, and so I don't take something like that lightly, so I wasn't willing to go through the trouble of continuing to have my hands cramp up for not a lot of outcome. Here's a little braggalicious moment where I'll show you some things that I've knitted using the knitting thimble. Here we have the beautiful Damayaka Lopa, the fleece cardigan by Pinaguri, which many people on YouTube have knitted, and then also some famous mittens, which you might recognize. These are the Selbu mittens by Skein and the Shine mittens by Kamabornia. Wonderful patterns. I have the Babble hat, which many of you are familiar with. It's missing its bauble, but it'll be on there soon. Now, today's demonstration, because I do want to use it to show you the knitting thimble. I'm using just some Knit Picks Wool of the Andes Sport. It is one of my favorite yarns to do color work with. And here I'm knitting a cuff of a mitten. Now this is some shameless self-promotion because it's actually for this mitten design, which is a Slavic mitten that I've designed. I'm originally from Bosnia, so I'll be doing a series of these. This is the back of it, so I'm working on that pattern right now. That's what I'll be using for this demonstration to show you how to use the knitting thimble. Here I have my second cuff that I'm knitting, and everything is set up on 4 DPNs. It doesn't actually matter what you're using. You could just be knitting in the round with circular needles. In this case, it happens to be the DPNs. And so this is how I wear my knitting thimble. Some people, as I've seen in photos and demonstrations, wear it such that the yarn guides are at the top of the finger. So the yarn goes through the opening here and then across the finger and through the opening and down. That could work. That is not how I've been teaching myself to knit with the yarn guide or the knitting thimble. I actually flip it around, which helps me control my tension a little bit more. So my yarn guides are actually on the underside here. And I'll show you how I strand those. So I would like the white to be the contrasting color, and the mustard is my main color, and so I will put that on the left hand side. So first I take the mustard color, string it through, and then I take the white and I string it through here. And then what I do with these back yarns is that in order to separate them, I put my middle finger through the 2, and then I grab both by my ring finger and sort of sandwich it in between the ring finger and the pinky. At that point, I don't need to squeeze this very much because actually that's quite a bit of tension for me, I find. So now I can pick up my knitting and I can show you how I can knit across here. With my yarn positioned here in the back and my work in the front, I am ready to go. So I knit in continental style, and I am also what's known as a picker. Using this yarn guide really allows me to be able to knit fairly fast, and if I was able to concentrate not on filming and doing this at the same time, I probably would be able to knit even faster. But speed is not always the goal, but sometimes it is fun and helpful. So I'm able to just smoothly go across. Now, my knitting style might be a little bit different to what you're used to seeing, which is that I push the needle with I push the yarn with my middle finger here, and not everyone does that. just gonna knit here a little bit so that you can see what this looks like. I will insert a video, Instagram video here of me using the knitting thimble, and once I get into the groove I can knit pretty quickly. And again, I can do all of this and manage my yarns without my hands getting cramped up, and that's the most important part. You can also see here that using the knitting thimble is really helpful in creating some really nice floats. Now, of course, floats and yarn tension is a matter of practice. However, using the knitting thimble and not having my hands cramp up really allows me to focus on the tension and knitting speed and things like that, which makes color work even more fun. And here is the underside. So if you haven't tried it, I would highly recommend the knitting thimble. And if you don't want to spend a whole lot of money and you're in the US, you can, as I said, get these from Knit Picks. Probably other brands make them as well. I would highly recommend that you give it a try, and you might have to play around. If this yarn guide orientation doesn't work for you, then maybe flipping it around to the underside and knitting in the way that I do might be helpful. If you know some information about knitting thimble history, I would love to hear it in the comments below. Feel free. I'd love to check it out, as I was not able to find anything on my own, but of course I will keep searching. And if you are interested in this knitting pattern for these Slavic mittens, stay tuned to my Ravelry, and I'm sure I might even make a video post about it here. All right, take care.